no one is you and that is your superpower. When you compare yourself to someone else, you're diluting that power. You're saying that because you're not like them, you're not good enough. And that's not true.
In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticising anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had.
This is the opening from The Great Gatsby, so if that sounds familiar to you, you may also like The Great Gatsby. Hello, I do as well. That quote is a great one to start with if we're talking about how to stop comparing yourself to other people, because the same way that that quote is saying be kind to people basically, because you don't know what people have gone through, before you criticise someone, realise that they may not have started off the same place you have. I think you can apply the same thing to comparison. Anytime that you start to compare yourself to someone else, think about if you're actually going to give yourself a fair comparison there, or if you're comparing yourself to someone who has had more advantages than you. Maybe they have more free time, so they're able to pursue their passions. Maybe they earn more money than you do. They have a better work-life balance. Maybe they're more resilient than you. I certainly sometimes can feel inadequate when I compare myself to some of my friends, because they haven't had to deal with the same mental health stuff that I've had to deal with, and maybe you're in a similar situation. You look at these people and they just seem to have something different. They seem to have an advantage when it comes to the way that they're able to deal with the world and the way they can handle their emotions. Before you start to compare yourself to other people, ask yourself if you're actually going to give yourself a fair comparison. Now, I know that's really easy to say. In practice, I think it's pretty normal to compare how we're doing to how other people are doing, to compare career-wise, money-wise, to compare our lives, our lifestyles, because that can give us a handle on what's normal or what's acceptable, what's expected of us from our society or our family. It's normal to compare. But I wanted to start off with this quote from The Great Gatsby because I think that really says it. Remember that everyone is different. Not everyone's going to have had the same advantages. Comparison is the thief of joy. I want you to kind of get it lodged in your brain, because you can be having a moment with something that you're really proud of achieving, and as soon as you compare that to someone else, you're going to notice that that joyful pride that you had in whatever you'd achieved is going to be deflated. So I've got into running recently. I was so happy when I went for just a short run, because I'm building it up slowly, and I went for a short run and I didn't have to stop. My initial response was really joyful, really happy. I'm so excited, like I can't believe like I'm seeing progress. It's really encouraging to see progress. And then I had this voice in my head going, you ran for like 7 minutes, like this is not anything to be proud of. But comparison is the thief of joy. My sister runs marathons. What I did in comparison to her is nothing. You know, she can run for 4 hours straight. I ran for 7 minutes and then was really out of breath. But everything is relative. And compared to me last week, running around the block was a huge achievement. It's not about comparing to someone who runs marathons. Comparison is the thief of joy. Compare yourself instead, if you are going to compare, which I think it's natural that we do. Compare yourself maybe to your past self. So compared to me 2 years ago, me right now is thriving. Things are so much better than they used to be. So acknowledge the good things that are happening and don't let yourself compare to anyone else. You are your only competition, basically. And if you're not doing better than you were 2 years ago, that's nothing to be concerned about either. You still have so many good qualities. You are unique. You've had experiences that are individual to you, because even if you shared them with other people, you respond to everything in your own way. So say there's like a dinner with 9 people there. Everyone is probably going to have a very different evening. Even if all of you are sat around the table just having a nice dinner, yes, there'll be different conversations going, but I mean, you're all in the same environment. You're all having the same meal. You're eating together. You're there for the same amount of time, but everyone will have a really different experience. So anything you've experienced, that's unique to you. So you don't need to compare yourself to anyone else. How cool is it that everyone around right now, we've all had a different day? Again, even if you're living with people, or you met a friend for coffee, or you went into a specific workplace, everyone there is having a different day. You don't need to compare your experience, your day, your abilities to anyone else's. Another quote that's helpful, because I really like these little catchy quotes that can get stuck in your head, like comparison is the thief of joy. There's the quote about no one is you and that is your superpower. When you compare yourself to someone else, you're diluting that power. You're saying that because you're not like them, you're not good enough. And that's not true. There are things about you and the way you react to things, or the way that you are personality-wise, the way you think, your creativity. There are things about you that are specific and unique to you that make you you. To compare yourself to someone else is to do yourself a disservice. They're not you. A flower can be beautiful in its own right. It's not comparing itself to other flowers. A rose isn't thinking, oh, but I'm not like a daisy. An apple tree with the apple blossom isn't sad that it's not a rose. These things can both be beautiful in and of themselves. They're different, but they're beautiful. It doesn't have to be a competition between them. Similarly, you don't have to compare yourself to anyone else. But if you are going to compare yourself, you can compare yourself to your past self, because at least there is some kind of fair ground to compare, because that's you, just a more up-to-date version of you. I love tea so much. I've got tea and I've got biscuits. Ideal. I think a helpful exercise if we want to stop comparing ourselves to other people. I talk about journaling a lot on my channel because it has been something that's helped me so much. Expressing myself through writing, having things written and being able to analyse what's happening has been really helpful to me. So I wanted to include some writing that you could do when we're talking about how to stop comparing yourself to other people. One thing that can help is either to do a timeline, so get a blank piece of paper and do a timeline of your life and put in all of the key events, like big things that have happened, emotional things that you've gone through, anything that has had an impact. Quite a lot of comparison can be thinking that we're not good enough compared to other people, or that other people are ahead of us and we're feeling behind, which incidentally I think I'm going to do a whole video on, because that is something that I feel a lot and something that I'm working through. So doing a timeline and putting in all of these big notable events in your life can remind you of all of the things you've been through and show you why you are where you are now. It's not about judging yourself, but it can just help reassure you and encourage you even. And one way, aside from the timeline, another thing that I think can be a really encouraging thing to do is to just write a list, either type it, because that way you can write quite quickly, you don't have to think too much about it, whereas obviously it takes longer to write out by hand. Sorry if you can hear my dog rustling about on the sofa. If you can write a list of things you're proud of achieving, things that you've succeeded at, and also then counter that by writing a list of things that you've gone through. She's making so much noise. This is not to do with anyone else. This is to do with focusing on you and looking at the stuff that you've been through and reminding yourself that you are actually really strong, you're really resilient. So often we can not undervalue ourselves, but we can minimize stuff that we've worked through, whether it's stuff emotionally or maybe like me, you had substance abuse problems. So working through that is a really big thing. Maybe you worked really hard one year and turned around your grades at school. It doesn't have to be something big. Obviously, like for me, facing my addiction is a big thing and it's still like an ongoing thing, but it doesn't have to be something big like that. It can be something small, like, oh, I did this really amazing painting that I'm really proud of, or I was a bit brave and I found a new place to walk in the morning. Make a list of these things and these moments, because it's taking your focus away from what other people are doing, because everything is relative. It's taking your focus away from them and looking at, oh, look at all of this stuff that I've achieved, or look at these things that I have been through and learned from, or that I'm still going through and I'm having to live with that on a daily basis, but here I am and I'm showing up and I'm trying my best. We're going to talk about social media, and I guess it's different if it's, really close friends that you talk to, but I think we can overestimate what someone's life is like if we don't know them that well, and I'm definitely going to talk about that later. But this stuff that you know, because you know yourself really well, because you're walking around with your brain and with your body every day, like you're living with this all the time. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't have to live with what's going on up here half the time. But you know yourself so well, you know what's going on inside, you know the thoughts that are happening and what you're dealing with every day, and you don't know what that looks like for other people. You don't know what's going on in their head. You may see they're really successful career-wise, or they're really brave, or they're vegan, or they work out, or they read loads, and you wish you could do that, and you're comparing yourself to all of these external things. You don't know unless, as I said before, unless they're a really good friend or a family member who you're close to and they're talking through this stuff with you, and you realise that, yeah, on the surface it all looks great, but actually they're dealing with some really difficult stuff that they're not publicly sharing with everyone. Unless you're close to them like that, you don't actually know what's happening. So doing this list of writing your successes, things that you're proud of achieving, even if it's something small that other people might look at and be like, why, or you might even, as you're writing it, you might think, why does this matter? Why does it matter that I went on a walk today? Or why does it matter that I did a nice painting? But when you're having those thoughts, those are coming from a comparing yourself to other people perspective. You're thinking, I'm not good enough compared to someone else, or this is really silly. Why do I have to write a list of my successes? This is not good compared to other people. This is just a small thing. It doesn't matter. But you're still in that mindset of comparing to other people. This is about you. Focus on yourself. Look at your successes. Look at what you've been through and remind yourself that you don't always have the whole story. You don't know what's going on with other people, but you do know what's happening with you. And even if this is the same with validating yourself, which again is a whole other video, and I've done some videos on my channel talking about that, so I'll link one of them, but I'm also thinking of doing a big video to talk about self-validation because it's such a big topic and it's so important and so healing. But this is also why self-validation is really important, because you know yourself, you know what's happening in your thoughts all the time, you know what you're dealing with every day. That other people, even your close friends and family, there will be stuff that you're not talking about with them because it's really private, or you are still going through it and you don't know how to process it, you don't want to share it yet. There's stuff like that that you're dealing with. You know what that's like. That can go on your list of successes or of things that you're dealing with, and you can be proud of yourself for doing that, and you can validate yourself through writing this list of stuff, because you can remind yourself then to keep the focus on you. Look at everything in the context of your life. Don't be like, oh, but compared to them, I'm not doing this, or compared to them, I'm struggling with this, and that's not a problem for them. It doesn't matter. Keep the focus on you. You can just compare yourself, if anything, to past you and be like, look at this stuff I've dealt with, or look at this stuff I've been through, and look, I'm still here, and I'm strong, I'm resilient, I'm kind, I'm hopeful. I've not let all of these things turn me cynical. I think a good prompt could be, in this difficult year, or think back to a difficult time, what are some small things I'm proud of achieving? And when I say small things, it's like, oh, I showered, or I made myself a nice salad, I went for a walk, as well as the things like, oh, I graduated, or I got this really good mark on this essay I worked hard on, I took up running, I made some new friends. It can be big stuff and small stuff, but don't neglect the small things. The little things are important. So that's one prompt. And the other thing could be looking back over the past few years. What are some things that I have dealt with or overcome or been through, and I'm stronger as a result? It could be something big, like I'm saying with addiction. That would definitely go on my list. But it's also going to be small things. I didn't let that thing get to me when they said that, or I have started journaling, so I'm validating myself through writing. Writing about the stuff you've been through, thinking about it, acknowledging all of these internal, like, inner realities that you've been through, which maybe other people aren't even aware of. Writing about that stuff is not only really validating, but it can also help you stop comparing yourself to other people, because it gets the focus back on you and reminds you of your story and why you are the way you are and why you are where you're at, and also reminds you of your potential. So I encourage you to write this. Now I'm gonna finish my tea and have my biscuits. Something that helps me to stop comparing myself to other people, either people that I know or people that you see online. Something that helps me is to ask myself the question, where does comparison get me? Now, this can be a bit of an annoying thing to ask yourself depending on your mood, kind of similar to when people say you should try deep breathing for when you feel anxious or when you feel stressed. And when you're in that state, to hear someone say try deep breathing is the most infuriating thing, but it actually does work. So similarly, when you are feeling really down because you feel inadequate compared to the people around you or the people that you're seeing online and you're comparing your life to theirs, it can be annoying for someone to come along and say, where does comparison get you? You might be sitting there thinking, well, I know it's not helpful, but I'm in it now and I have compared myself to other people and I feel rubbish. But I think that's important to acknowledge as well. So if you just for a second think about, if that question is annoying you, the where does comparison get you, or if you're in a good state and you're trying not to compare yourself to other people, you're focusing on your journey, on the things that are good with you, the progress that you specifically have made, not comparing it to anyone else. Either way, for a second here, let's do like a little thought experiment and start comparing yourself to someone, maybe to like a famous actor or a famous singer or someone in your life who's really successful at the moment and who is thriving and doing really well. Compare yourself to them. This is a thought experiment, so we're not going to get carried away. We're doing this, asking ourselves this question to notice how we feel when we start comparing ourselves to other people. So start comparing yourself to someone. If you're anything like me, you will notice that when you start comparing, particularly if you're doing like an unfair comparison, like you're comparing your failures to someone else's successes, for example, you will probably start feeling sad, uninspired, unmotivated, deflated, like we mentioned earlier. Maybe you even start to feel pathetic. You start wondering why you're trying. That probably doesn't feel very nice, does it? You probably now are questioning yourself, you're feeling down, you're feeling like you're a failure or you're not good enough. None of these things are true. This is why I keep going on about comparison is the thief of joy. Through that thought experiment, you can see that when you start comparing yourself to other people, it does tend to affect you negatively. Now, yes, we could compare ourselves to people who aren't doing so well. I don't know about you, but it always tends to work one way. It tends to work in that I'm not doing so well and I'm comparing myself to someone who is doing well. In the comparison, I am always the one lacking. And that's never going to make you feel good. It's about becoming aware of that and noticing what prompts you to start that comparison. And there will be some things that are things that you need to work on, things that you are insecure about, things that are a you problem. Sometimes it is a you problem. But there'll be other things where it's just a question of noticing what starts you off on that comparison. So maybe you might think that you need to start spending less time on Instagram. We're going to talk about Instagram a bit later because it can be such a nightmare in terms of comparison. But once you become aware of it, maybe you can then be like, oh, I noticed that I start comparing myself when I spend a lot of time on Instagram or when I'm not putting my energy into my passion projects. I start comparing myself to other people. Bring some self-awareness to it and you can then stop doing it so much. The other thing to remember with this is that everything is relative. We know I talked about this a bit with the running example of my sister runs marathons versus me who's just happy to run around the block. So that run that I did, relative to the first run I ever did, which was really difficult, that run was amazing. I don't need to compare myself to my sister. Maybe her similar situation would be a run where she did a PB and then a run where she didn't do so well. Maybe she didn't have enough energy or she was really tired, right? Like everything is relative. Don't be comparing your situation to someone else's if it's not gonna help. I know sometimes comparison can be inevitable and we just can't help it, but do remember to at least be fair to yourself and make it like a relative comparison. I think the other thing that can help here is to have an abundance mindset, is to stop viewing success or happiness or anything good, money, relationship, friendships, whatever it is that you feel like you're lacking and you're comparing yourself to other people and coming up short. Maybe it's to do with your personality or the way you look or your clothes, what you have, where you live. The list goes on. We can compare so many things, but stop viewing these things as finite. Stop thinking that there's only a certain amount of success or a certain amount of happiness, a certain amount of money in the world. Because what we can tend to do when we're comparing ourselves to other people, I'm going to talk about jealousy a bit later on, that can factor into this because we can think that because this person is so successful that maybe there's less for us, which is not true. Once you get into that abundance mindset, realizing that you can both be great. And similarly, relatively, my run round the block versus my sister's marathon, these things can both be great because they are relative to the person. It's not about comparing them because they are completely different situations in different contexts. Both things can be great. You feeling like you don't earn enough money, you don't have the job that you want, you don't have to compare yourself to someone else. But if you do, you can both be good. Yes, you might think, oh, this person's earning more money or I wish I lived in a home like theirs, but you probably, hopefully, still earn a decent living and there are probably things to be grateful for in your home. Even if it's just, I have a nice bed, I have running water, I have electricity. And I'm saying these luxuries because you're watching this video, so I'm assuming you have some of these things. If you bring more abundance into it and start viewing things with an abundance mindset, that's going to stop you comparing so much. And I think that links nicely with gratitude, which I talk a lot about on this channel because I think it's so fundamental, both in terms of appreciating what you have, but also if you want to manifest something more, be grateful for it as if you already have it. And gratitude is also going to help you stop comparing yourself to others because you're going to then be focused on the good qualities that you have or the good things that you have. And it's all going to be, the focus is then going to be on you and your life and how you're doing and hopefully the progress that you're making or the things that you're learning, as opposed to comparing yourself to what other people have, what other people are doing, how other people's lives are going compared to yours. Gratitude is going to help you focus on your journey, yourself, and that's going to help you stop comparing yourself to other people. You are incomparable. Stop doing yourself such a disservice by comparing yourself to other people. No one is you. That's amazing. Stop comparing yourself to someone else. They're not you. I have my tea and crisps. Don't really know how I'm going to manage to eat these and talk at the same time. Just wondering if there's a spider over there on the floor. That's fun. If we're talking about comparison and you start thinking, but what if they're better than me? So what if they are? I mentioned this in my last video, which I will link if you want to watch. Everyone's story is different. So you might be comparing yourself to something that you don't have the whole picture of. You're comparing yourself to the finished product. I quite like to think of, don't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. People can use that in terms of like maybe a fitness goal. If you've just started running, don't compare your time or your ability to run with someone who's been running for years. Like, you're then comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. It's not a comparable thing. It's not a competition, and you can't compare those things. You need to compare your chapter 1 if you're going to compare, which I don't think we need to, but if you were going to have a fair comparison, it would have to be your chapter 1 and their chapter 1, but you're not seeing their chapter 1, you're seeing their chapter 20. Same thing if you want to start a YouTube channel. If you can go back and look at someone's earlier content and see how they started, that is probably going to give you a more reasonable idea of what you can expect, instead of comparing to your favourite YouTuber who has lots of subscribers and has been doing this maybe for years, maybe it's now their full-time job. You can't compare yourself to them if you're just starting out. It's not fair to you, and it's not a true comparison. The other thing, aside from comparing like chapter 1 to chapter 20, is you have to ask yourself, and bear this in mind, is the comparison real? This is perpetuated by social media, where people show a highlight reel of their life. I'm thinking particularly of Instagram, where people can post these really nice like aesthetic pictures or photos on their stories, and you think, oh, look at them, they're having this great time, they're having a great life. And then when you actually catch up with this person, you hear they were really miserable that night because they felt really tired, but they still had to go out, or, you know, there's all sorts of things that could be going on which aren't conveyed in an Instagram picture, just given like the kind of platform that Instagram is. But even outside of that kind of comparison on social media, and that's not even, we've not even talked there about like people who edit their photos or add filters, it's really not anything that you could compare. Like, even just the filters that Instagram has on the app, you can change so much about the photo. Again, if we're talking about like a fair comparison, it's not a fair comparison to compare a photo you just took of yourself with a photo that someone's posted on Instagram, which they've probably selected specifically for that purpose. They've probably edited it a little bit, even if it's only like changing the saturation or the contrast or the brightness. That's not even talking about people who will Photoshop their photos. So in that sense, in terms of social media, it's not comparable. But I'm also thinking of real life examples where you're just talking with your friend, and in your head, you will be thinking their life sounds so much better than yours, but you don't have the full story. I'm thinking particularly of this one thing that happened, which I think gives this example really well, of sometimes we can paint a picture of someone else's life and compare our life to that and think they have so many more friends, or they're way more sociable than me, or they just have a better life, people want to be around them more, which that may be true. But this one example I'm thinking of, I a few years ago went to a wedding with a friend, to another friend's wedding, so it was a lovely occasion and it was great. But I remember I was staying in a hotel, and my friend who I was travelling with was staying, I don't know whether I should tell this story, she doesn't even know about my channel, and I don't think she would mind anyway, in a friend's house. And the friend was away, and she said, yep, you can stay in my empty flat for this wedding. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, she has so many more friends than me. She's got a friend who lives in this specific city, which isn't the city like that we grew up in. She's got a friend who lives here, and this friend is letting her stay in her flat. This must be like quite a good friend. This isn't, you know, you wouldn't let just anyone stay in your house. So I'm like, oh, I've not heard her talk about this friend. She must just have this. In my head, I'm imagining she has such a huge, I don't want to say social network because that just makes me think of Facebook, but because that film's really good. That's what's going on in my head, and I'm instantly comparing my friends, my friendships. I'm comparing my friendships to hers, and I'm thinking, oh, she's got so many more friends than me. Later on, like we're talking months later, I found out that that flat belonged to someone that I knew, but she just never said that at the time. She'd never said, oh yeah, do you remember so-and-so from school? Yeah, this is her flat. And I was like, oh, of course it would make sense for her to lend her flat. But in my head, I built up this picture of her having all of these, and she definitely does. Like, she is a very sociable person, so I'm sure she does have more friends than me. But do you see, I was comparing myself to something that didn't even exist. I was just taking what she'd said, and my mind ran away with it. And I was comparing myself then to something that wasn't even real. Like, I knew this friend who lent her the flat. So do you get what I mean when I'm talking about, is this a real comparison? The same with social media. Are you taking a lot of, not poetic license, but your imagination is running away with you and you're making up situations or making yourself feel bad by imagining something that's not even true? Because as well, we can often imagine the reality as a lot more like a fantasy. Like, if someone tells us about their new friend or their new boyfriend, you can imagine like this perfect person. You can imagine it as one thing, and then you meet the person, you're like, oh, this person is great. Like, they're just a real person. We can have a tendency to really hype up the reality of something in our imagination and make it so much more than it actually is. And that's going to make you feel bad in comparison, because it's, again, not real. If you can become aware of yourself doing that, that can be really helpful. And now that I've said this, maybe you'll notice next time in conversation when someone says they went on holiday to this beautiful villa or this beautiful house, or they're just describing a situation, maybe they're describing their friendship group or whatever, you might start picturing that a certain way, or you might start picturing their life a certain way. Catch yourself doing that and remind yourself that however you're imagining it, it's probably not like that. It's probably very different. And you don't need to compare your reality to theirs, especially a reality of theirs that you're making up in your head. So if you ask yourself, but what if they're better than me? We talked about, are they really better than you? In terms of, are they really better than you? Are you comparing yourself to something real or something that you've made up? But the other thing you can do is use comparison as motivation. This is similar to the way you can use jealousy. I've talked about jealousy before on my channel, so I will link that video if you want to watch it, because I discussed that in depth there. But what I mean when I say use comparison as motivation is, what is it about this person that you're comparing yourself to and that you come up short? What is it that you wish you were like? What would your dream self be like? So do they have a better career, or are they earning more money? Do they have a specific car? Do they live in a specific house? Are they able to travel for their work? What feelings are brought up in you when you compare yourself to them? What is it that you feel inadequate with? Maybe you feel inadequate compared to them, yes, in terms of money, or it could be in terms of their relationships, their friendships. Maybe they seem to have a better social life than you. Maybe you feel self-conscious about the way you look, and there are so many layers to that, so I don't really want to talk about that in this video. That's going to be a whole separate video about body confidence and feeling good in your body whilst having a goal of feeling a certain way or looking a certain way. But whatever you're comparing yourself to and feeling like you're not good enough compared to them, you can use that as motivation, because the same way when you're jealous of someone, you're being told something there that maybe you haven't been able to admit to yourself yet. Whether it is you might be jealous of their career and you might think, oh, I didn't realise I wanted a career where I earn lots of money. Maybe that's something I need to think about a bit more. The fact that I feel inadequate compared to them, or the fact that I'm jealous of them, that could mean that this is actually something that I want. Maybe I need to start looking into what qualifications I need to get in order to get a higher paying job, or maybe I need to switch jobs or ask for a raise, right? Or if you're jealous or you're comparing yourself to someone who works at home and you compare your lifestyle to theirs and you think, oh, I really want to be able to work from home, and that seems like it would be better. Look at my life compared to theirs. I am rushing around, or I don't feel like I have enough time to like look after the house compared to this person who they work from home and they're telling me about how they can do their washing on their lunch break or keep things in order, and it just is a lot better than what it used to be like. Use that as motivation. You're learning through that comparison and through your own perceived inadequacy. You're learning what you actually want out of your life, what your dream life would look like. You're learning it through your reaction to the comparison to this person. Use that as motivation. Use that comparison and the feelings that arise in you when you compare yourself to that person and think, how can I be my best self? How can you be your best self? What can you do? Ask yourself, what can I do in order to, if you were going to compare, then be like, oh yes, we both now have work from home jobs and I feel a lot happier about that. Thank you so much for watching Dream Self Diaries, a series I'm doing on this channel which is dedicated to helping you develop healthy habits and level up your mindset so that you can embody your dream self today. If you want to see more videos about how to become your dream self, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.